An emotionally starved woman whose bond with a caregiver slowly replaces her marriage. It didn't start with love. It started with help. He knocked on the door, wearing a soft smile and carrying a clipboard. She almost didn't open it. But something about him, his calm, his warmth, made her want to. He wasn't her husband, but he remembered how she took her tea. What happens when the one who touches your heart isn't the one who wears your ring? Tell me below. Martha Lowell, 64, lived in a quiet suburb with hydrangeas out front and a marriage that had gone cold behind closed doors. Her husband, Carl, had been her partner for 41 years. A loyal man, but not an attentive one. In recent years, Carl had retreated into silence, routine, and sports replays. They barely touched, barely spoke. Martha had arthritis in her knees and shoulders. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to qualify for part-time. In-home assistance. That's when Malik arrived. He was 29. Kind eyes. Gentle voice. He had a mother her age, he said. He came twice a week, helped with stairs, groceries, stretching exercises. He never overstepped, never asked too much. But he listened, and that for Martha was new. One Monday morning, Malik arrived 10 minutes early. Martha was still in her robe, hair pinned loosely, holding a chipped teacup and humming a barely remembered tune. "I'm sorry," she said, startled and embarrassed. He just smiled. "You look peaceful." She blinked. No one had called her. That in years, he helped her unpack groceries, putting everything exactly where she liked it without asking. "Top shelf for flour, right?" he said, already reaching up. "You remembered," she murmured. "Details matter," he replied with a shrug. He carried heavy bags with ease, glancing at her now and then, not intrusively but attentively. He whistled softly while he worked, a low tune that seemed to settle into the walls. On one of those early afternoons, she casually mentioned missing a particular lemon tea she hadn't found in years. The next week, he returned with a box, that exact brand. "I found it online," he said. Took a while to track it down. She stood frozen in the doorway, the box in her hands, overcome by the specificity of the gesture. "Thank you," she said, but it sounded too small. Carl hadn't noticed much in years. That Thursday, Malik paused at the sound of her stereo. "Is that Sadie?" Her face lit up. "You know it?" He nodded. "I used to play a little piano. Not well, but enough to fall in love with this piece." She hadn't spoken about her music to anyone in a decade. She had even stopped playing. From then on, they spoke more deeply, about music, books, regrets. She told him how she used to write little poems in the margins of her recipe books. He asked to read one. She laughed, but fetched one anyway. He read it aloud, softly, and when she laughed at her own teenage words, he said, "It's beautiful, because it's yours." She hadn't laughed like that in years, not with Carl, not even with her closest friends. He called her Mrs. Lowell at first, but over time just Martha. And each time he said her name, it felt less like routine and more like recognition, like someone had opened a window in a room she hadn't realized had grown so still, so airless, so forgotten. Martha began to look forward to Mondays and Thursdays. She started brushing her hair again, wearing her favorite cardigan, dabbing perfume behind her ears, not for seduction, but for self. She checked the clock more often in the hour before his arrival. She brewed her tea just right, placing the second cup down on the table before he even knocked. Malik told her stories about his childhood, about caring for his younger siblings, about his mother's hands, how they always smelled like cardamom and bread. He once shared how his mother cried the first time he brought home a paycheck. She said it was because someone else might finally see what she'd poured into me. Martha swallowed at that. It sat in her chest for hours. He was never flirtatious, but he was present. And presence to a woman starved of it felt dangerously close to intimacy. One day after helping her up from the couch, their hands lingered. Neither of them moved. Her breath caught. He looked at her, not like a patient, but like a person. For a moment she let herself imagine, his hand gently placed on the small of her back, a conversation over wine, laughter spilling past the rim of a glass. Not desire, just warmth, company. She stepped back, smiled awkwardly. He didn't push, just nodded, and left the room with grace. That night she journaled for the first time in over 20 years. She opened to a fresh page and wrote slowly, "I don't want him. Not like that. But I want what wakes up in me when he's near." She traced over the word wakes twice. The next week he brought her a small potted herb garden. "For your cooking," he said, "you mentioned missing fresh basil." It wasn't just thoughtful, it was precise, remembered, felt. Carl never remembered such things, never paid attention to what was missing from her. She almost cried. She turned to face the window so Malik wouldn't see. He didn't say anything, just went back to watering the ferns. But when he left that day, she walked him to the door, and for the first time she watched him until he turned the corner. And she whispered softly, "Thank you for noticing." Even though he didn't hear, Martha began avoiding Carl's questions. She grew quieter at dinner, not out of anger but out of disinterest. She stirred her soup without tasting it, let conversation pass without lifting her eyes. After Malik's visits, she lingered longer on the porch, her fingers tracing the edge of the herb pot like it held the answer to a question she was too afraid to ask. She reread old books, Jane Austen, Toni Morrison, books where women were seen, underlining lines she had skipped in her youth, lines that now felt like mirrors. She wasn't cheating. There had been no touch, no kiss, no words exchanged in secret. But her body remembered, the warmth, the aliveness. Her breath, once shallow, deepened when Malik entered a room. One night Carl turned to her during a rerun of Antiques Roadshow and said, "You've seemed different lately." She smiled. "I've been thinking more." He nodded slowly, not unkindly, but didn't ask what about. She started journaling more. Pages filled quickly, half reflections, half confessions. Sometimes her handwriting shook. "He brings nothing but light, and yet I feel like I'm hiding in shadows. How can someone so kind make me feel like I'm doing something wrong just by feeling?" She tucked those pages deep in a drawer, next to old photographs and dried lavender. One afternoon, Malik lingered longer than usual after helping her stretch. He handed her a bottle of water and leaned against the doorframe. "You okay, Martha?" he asked, eyes gentle. She hesitated. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "Just a lot on my mind." He didn't press, just smiled. "You've got a good heart. Just make sure you leave space for yourself in it." She watched him leave, standing at the doorway long after it clicked shut. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It throbbed. That night she played piano for the first time in years. Only a few notes, barely a tune. But it echoed through the house. Carl didn't say anything, just looked up from his book and watched. She didn't stop playing, even if no one applauded. One day Malik announced he was transferring to a different district, budget cuts. She stood in the hallway, hands clasped, her breath catching somewhere between her ribs and throat. He explained it simply, briefly, as if it didn't matter, but to her, it did. She nodded politely, smiled even, thanked him for his time, his care, his patience. Then she closed the door behind him and pressed her back against it. The hallway was too quiet, her chest too full. She didn't cry right away. She just stood there, letting the silence speak. On the kitchen table he had left a card. "You made my job feel like a calling. Thank you, Mrs. Lowell. You reminded me that kindness matters." She picked it up. "Read it," then read it again. Her fingers curled around the edges, soft and trembling. She held the card to her chest like a keepsake from a life she had only borrowed. Later that evening, she placed it in her top drawer, beneath her scarves, beside her old journal, next to a dried petal from her wedding bouquet. She never called him. But she watered the herb garden, carefully, faithfully. The basil thrived, so did the rosemary. She added fresh mint to her tea, whispering his name once as she stirred. She began playing music again during dinner, not to fill the air, but because she had something worth listening to. One evening, Carl reached for her hand while they watched the news. His hand was warm, familiar. She didn't pull away, not because she had erased Malik, but because Malik had reminded her of the version of herself who once extended love freely, who reached without fear, who hummed while she cooked, And though Malik was gone, that woman, the one she thought she had lost, remained, still humming, still here. Sometimes the people who save us don't stay. They just remind us of who we were before we forgot. Martha never told Carl, but she began humming again. And every time she did, it felt like coming home. Have you ever felt more alive with someone who wasn't yours to keep? Share your thoughts. I'm here.